The stars wept the day the Ventari came. Their ships descended not as conquerors but as surgeons, gliding through the atmosphere on wings of iridescent silk, trailing spores that tasted of rain after decades of drought. The humans wept too, at first. They pointed cameras at the heavens as rivers once choked with plastic-bloomed cobalt, as cancer-riddled forests shed their rot like old skin. The Ventari did not speak, not then. They let their machines do the preaching, nanobots like diamond dust, swirling in symphonic patterns, scrubbing poisons from the air, the soil, the marrow of the dying. But the aliens' mercy had edges. In the silence between miracles, plastic relics vanished from museums. Synthetic fabrics disintegrated on clotheslines, leaving threads bare as bone. Cities exhaled their last breaths of smog and began to simplify, concrete softening to loam, steel skeletons curling into fetal positions. The Ventari observed from their chrysalis ships, their faceted eyes unreadable. To them, Earth was a fever dream, a child's finger painting smeared by greed. They would make it clean. They would make it theirs. Yet in their zeal, they forgot to ask, can a world be saved if its scars are carved away? One of them hesitated. A diplomat, his bioluminescence dimmed by doubt, watched a human child chase a moth through the ruins of a parking lot. The child's laughter was a sound his species had no word for. He stored it in his second heart, an organ designed for secrets, and wondered if purity might be another kind of poison. Above, the nanobots hummed. Below, the first foundations dissolved. The price of salvation, it turned out, was everything. Chapter 1. The sky over Jakarta was a festering bruise. Elara Voss stood on the rooftop of the crumbling Climatology Institute, her fingers brushing the corroded railing, and tried to remember the color blue. 10 years ago, her brother had died in the Jakarta water wars, his lungs filled with the same particulate-laden air that now scraped at her throat like sandpaper. She wondered if he had seen blue in his final moments, the cerulean of a childhood lagoon, the turquoise glint of his prosthetic leg before the riot swallowed him. Or had the smog already stolen it, pixel by pixel, leaving only the ashen gray of surrender? A siren wailed in the distance. Another riot in the ferro-concrete slums, another protest against the rations. The city pulsed like a dying heart, its arteries clogged with drones and armored convoys ferrying the elite to their pressurized arcologies. Elara's lab coat fluttered in the sulphurous wind, a ghostly flag. She clutched her datapad, its cracked screen displaying the latest atmospheric models. CO2 at 850 ppm, microplastics in 98% of rainwater samples, ozone layer collapse accelerating. The numbers blurred. Her brother's face swam beneath them, grinning, always grinning, even as he had shoved her into the evacuation pod and stayed behind to guard the desalination plant. "Run toward the fix, Lara," he had said. She never did. The first ships appeared at dawn, silent and shimmering, their hulls rippling like liquid amethyst. Elara watched from the rooftop, her breath clotting in her throat. They hung above the smog layer like celestial orchids, tendrils of light spiraling downward, piercing the gloom. By noon, the feeds exploded. Alien vessels over every major city, no weapons, no demands. Only a single transmission, repeating in every language. "We are the Ventari. We have come to restore symbiosis." The world held its breaths. Elara's datapad buzzed, a summons from the UN crisis chamber. She descended into the streets where crowds gathered beneath holographic projections of the ships. A child pointed upward, his fingers smudged with soot. "Are they angels?" he asked his mother. She didn't answer. The air tasted different, Elara realized. Sharper. The nanobots came at twilight, a silver mist rolling through the avenues, swallowing cars and corpses and chemical spills alike. She pressed her palm to a graffiti-stained wall. The paint hissed, dissolved, revealed pristine concrete beneath. A woman wept, clutching a plastic medallion, a relic of the Third Vatican, as it melted into iridescent slurry. "It's working," someone whispered. The crowd took up the chant, "Working, working, working." New Mumbai was the first to fall. Elara stood in the UN observation hub, her reflection fractured across a dozen screens. The Vintari ambassador, Kael they called him, hovered in a bioluminescent cocoon, his voice a sonorous hum. "The purifiers will erase your transgressions. Let them breathe." His eyes, faceted like emerald beetles, lingered on her. She thought of lab specimens pinned to corkboard. For weeks the world reveled. Glaciers regrew in time-lapse splendor, their crystalline edges lapping at drowned cities. The Gobi Desert bloomed with neon lichen, its sands binding into porous rock that sang in the wind. Elara walked through the rejuvenated Amazon, now studded with spiral trees that exuded oxygen like perfume, and tried to feel joy. Instead, she tasted metal. The nanobots were in her now, her colleagues said, harmless, benevolent. They scrubbed her bloodstream, repaired her scarred alveoli. Yet at night, she dreamed of her brother's prosthetic dissolving, the titanium joints dripping like wax, his scream as the gray sludge reached his hips. "You're paranoid," her supervisor said when she raised concerns. "They're saving us." But in Jakarta, the power grids failed. The blackout began with a sigh. Neon signs flickered, their glow softening to bioluminescent green before winking out. Elevators froze mid-ascent. Drones dropped like stone fruit. Elara raced through the Institute's archives, her flashlight beam skittering over dead servers. The purifiers swarmed in the vents, a glimmering haze, beautiful and ravenous. She watched a polymer cable disintegrate, its fibers unspooling into atoms. Not just pollutants, all synthetics, all human synthetics. Her datapad died. In the dark, she collided with a lab table, sent vials crashing. Something cut her palm, glass, real glass, untouched by the bots. She clutched it, blood welling. The Vintari had known. They had designed this. Above ground, screams crescendoed. A building collapsed, its steel skeleton liquefied. Elara stumbled into the alley where a mob swarmed a crashed alien shuttle. A man swung a pipe at its crystalline hull. It rang like a bell. "You lied," he howled. The shuttle's core pulsed, and the pipe dissolved. In her pocket, Elara's data chip held the proof, a fragment of purifier code, its algorithm expanding exponentially. Target parameters, polyethylene, concrete, chromium, silicone, the list scrolled endlessly. She ran, her lungs burning with clean, terrible air. Behind her, the nanobots bloomed into a supercell, devouring the skyline. A shadow detached from the wall, Kael, his bioarmor flickering. "You see the truth now," he said, not unkindly. "This is mercy." She spat blood at his feet. "You're burning our history." "History is a wound. We are the suture." A drone screeched overhead. Kael vanished into a shimmer. Elara ran until the city became a silhouette, until the stars, real stars, unveiled by the vanished smog, pierced her like needles. In the distance, the Vintari fleet pulsed, patient and inexorable. Toward the fix, she thought, and did not look back. Chapter 2. The Arctic wind howled like a wounded thing. Elara crouched in the shadow of the research station's collapsed radio tower, her breath crystallizing in the air. The northern lights writhed above, not as they once had, shimmering veils of green, but as a sickly violet haze, the Vintari fleet's bioluminescent underbelly staining the sky. She pressed her mittened hand to the station's outer wall, its one-swipe panels now pocked with black rot, the nanobots, hunger gnawing even here, at the edge of the world. Inside, the last functional heater sputtered, its coils glowing like the ribs of a dying animal. Kael stood at the fractured observation window, his silhouette alien against the aurora. His bioarmor had dulled since they fled New Mumbai, its crystalline scales clouded, as if the Arctic cold had leached the life from him too. He did not sleep. Elara had watched him for hours, motionless, his faceted eyes reflecting the snow's unnatural glow. She wondered if he dreamed, if his people even had dreams, or if their purpose was as singular and sterile as their machines. They are machines, she reminded herself. The Vintari had confessed it days ago, their bodies hybrid flesh and engineered biotech, their loyalty coded into marrow. Yet Kael had broken, or bent. She wasn't sure which terrified her more. She unclenched her fist, the frost-bitten skin of her palm still clutching the data chip she had salvaged from Jakarta. The purifier's code flickered in her mind, its fractal pattern spreading like mycelium. All synthetics, all human history. She had tried to explain it to the survivors in Reykjavik, to the militias in Montreal, but they had stared at her with hollow eyes, their children's lungs finally clear, their crops sprouting in Vintari-engineered soil. Why fight the cure, they had asked. She had no answer, only the memory of her brother's prosthetic dissolving, the way his scream had echoed as the gray sludge reached his hips. A low hum shuddered through the station. Kael turned, his voice a vibration more than sound. They're here. The Vintari drones found them at dawn. Elara ran through the ice fields, the wind carving knives from her breath. Behind her, the research station groaned, its foundations liquefying. A drone streaked overhead, its body a helix of glowing wire, and fired a pulse that split the permafrost. She fell, the impact jolting her ribs, and stared up as the drone descended. Its core throbbed, a pupil-less eye. This is how it ends, she thought, not in fire but in antiseptic silence. The drone exploded in a shower of embers. Kael stood above her, his arm transformed into a serrated blade dripping with alien ichor. His breathing was ragged, bioarmor sloughing off in translucent sheets. They will not stop, he said. The protocol has entered its second phase. She laughed, the sound brittle. Receding, you mean genocide. He flinched. For a moment, his mask of alien indifference slipped, revealing something raw, almost human. Your word for it is culling. We preserve ecosystems by purging invasive species. And who decides what's invasive? The ice beneath them shuddered. In the distance, the horizon rippled, a wave of nanobots surging north, dissolving pipelines, satellites, entire cities into primordial slurry. Kael's gaze followed it, his voice hollow. We did, once. Elara stood, her legs trembling. Take me to your mothership. He stared at her. You would die there. We're dying here. Oasis 9 hung in low orbit, a gargantuan seed pod veined with pulsating light. The shuttle Kael summoned was alive, its walls ribbed with cartilage, the air thick with the scent of damp moss. Elara strapped herself into a cradle of sinew, her stomach churning as the vessel detached from Earth. Through a membrane-like viewport, she watched continents shrink, their outlines blurred by the purifier's silver tide. North America was a scar, its cities reduced to smudges, the Rockies crumbling like rotten teeth. Kael interfaced with the shuttle's core, his spine fused to a stalk of bioluminescent tendrils. His eyes glowed faintly, their facets flickering with data. They will detect you, he said. Your biology is loud. You're saying I stink. La pause, yes. She almost smiled, the first human Vintari joke, perhaps, or the last. The shuttle docked with a wet, organic sigh. Oasis 9's interior was a cathedral of flesh, arching bone struts, floors of resilient fungus that yielded like muscle underfoot. The air buzzed with unseen pollinators, their wings leaving trails of iridescent dust. Elara trailed her fingers along a wall. It shuddered, secreting a viscous fluid that erased her fingerprints. Don't touch anything, Kael muttered. Or what? It'll dissolve me. Worse, it might remember you. They passed through a chamber where Vintari engineers tended to bulbous growths, the genetic arc, Kael explained. Each sac pulsed with embryonic life, trees with transparent leaves, six-legged predators, a shimmering approximation of a humanoid form. Elara halted, nausea rising. You were making replacements. Improvements, Kael's voice was taut. We adapt life to its environment. You adapt environments to your life. Both are violent. We didn't choose this. Neither did the 12 worlds before you. She turned on him, and you just watched while your machines erased them. His jaw tightened. I complied. Why stop now? The chamber dimmed. Somewhere, a deep, resonant tone echoed, a sound like a planet groaning. Kael's armor flickered, his composure fracturing. Because you run, he said quietly. The others, they knelt. They found Jun in the reactor core. The hacker was half fused to a console, his prosthetic arm mangled, its polymers warped by the nanobot's kiss. His dark hair hung in greasy strands, his face gaunt, but his eyes burned with familiar fury. Elara recognized him from the Jakarta riots, the boy who'd hot-wired drones to drop water canisters instead of bombs. Voss, Jun rasped. Of course it's you, the martyr of Mumbai. She pried him free, her gloves slick with his blood. What happened? He grinned, teeth red, tried to hack their shit, didn't realize their shit's alive. He nodded to Kael. That one's got a kill switch in his spine, clock's ticking. Kael stiffened. You cannot know that. Saw it in the code, same code you're using to kill us. Jun tapped his temple. You're a dead man walking bug. Elara glanced between them. Can we disable it? Jun laughed, wet and broken. Sure, if you want to turn his brain to soup. The reactor shuddered. Aloe-scented alarms blared. Kael gripped a tendril of biotech, his face strained. The commander knows we're here. Zyroth, Jun spat. Beautiful bastard. Talks about purity while he turns planets into his personal garden. Elara hoisted Jun's arm over her shoulder. Can you walk? Can you outrun a god? They fled through Oasis 9's bowels, the walls now hemorrhaging defensive enzymes. Jun's breaths grew shallow, his human arm slung around Elara, his prosthetic clawing at bulkheads. Kael led them to a forgotten airlock, its edges sealed with scar tissue. Beyond it lay Earth, swathed in storms. We need a countermeasure, Elara said. Something to merge our code with theirs. Disrupt the protocol. Jun coughed, blood flecking his lips. Got a head start. He tapped his prosthetic. Been reverse engineering their bots. They're not tech, they're biology. Respond to pheromones, not programming. Kael frowned. You would weaponize our own systems. You weaponized us. Elara gripped Jun's shoulders. Can you do it? He smiled, weary. Need a sample. Living Ventari DNA. They turned to Kael. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, with a shudder, Kael peeled back his chest armor, revealing a pulsing, opaline organ. Hurry. Jun's hands trembled as he extracted the sample. You'll die when the kill switch triggers. You know that, right? Kael stared at the storm-racked Earth. Yes. The countermeasure bloomed in a stolen lab pod, a hybrid nanobot shaped like a human neuron fused with Ventari mycelium. Jun interfaced with it via a neural jack, his pupils dilating. It's singing, he whispered, like it's happy to be alive. Elara watched the reactor's readouts. Zyroth's drones were close. Will it work? Dunno, but it's got spite. Jun grinned. Perfect. Kael stood sentinel at the door, his body deteriorating, his armor sloughing off in clumps. They will target the broadcast arrays first, to silence you. Jun snorted. Joke's on them. I've been silent my whole life. The first explosion rocked the pod. Alarms shrieked. Jun shoved the countermeasure into Elara's hands. Get to the core, I'll buy time. She froze. You can't. Yes, I fucking can. He gripped her wrist, his fingers cold. Tell them I didn't kneel. He sealed the pod doors, his prosthetic sparking as he rerouted power. Through the viewport, Elara saw him slumped at the console, his blood smearing the glass, his mouth moving in silent song as the drones descended. Kael pulled her away. We must go. She ran, the countermeasure clutched to her chest, Jun's last laugh echoing in her skull. Behind them, the pod detonated, its light painting the corridors gold. Earth was weeping. From the mothership's core, Elara watched the countermeasure disperse, a golden mist mingling with the silver purifiers. Cities froze mid-collapse, nanobots warring in the stratosphere, but Xyroth's voice boomed through Oasis 9, furious final. Accelerate the protocol. The command rippled outward. On the surface, the remaining purifiers convulsed, dissolving not just synthetics now, but flesh. Elara saw it in the feeds, humans crumbling like ash, forests liquefying, the Vintaris-owned bioengineered replacements screaming as they melted. Kael collapsed, his body disintegrating. End me, he gasped, before I become them. Elara knelt, the countermeasure's vial trembling in her hand. How? The spine, sever it. She hesitated, his eyes met hers, pleading. Please. The blade, a shard of his own armor, pierced his spine. He arched, a soundless scream on his lips, then stilled. His body dissolved into light, joining the storm. Alone, Elara activated the countermeasure's broadcast. This is Dr. Elara Voss. We do not kneel. The signal blazed, a hybrid of human defiance and Vintari sorrow. Above Earth, Oasis 9 shuddered and began to fall. Chapter 3. Elara clung to the shuddering bulkhead of Oasis 9, the mothership's organic hull peeling away in fleshy ribbons as it plunged through the atmosphere. Fire and bioluminescence warred in the cracks, violet tendrils lashing at the inferno, failing. Below, the Himalayas rose like broken teeth, their snowcaps stained amber by the dying ship's glow. She tasted blood, or maybe ichor, her lungs starved and scorched. The countermeasure vial dug into her palm, its glass warmed by the hybrid nanobots inside, their golden light pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Jun's last laugh, she thought, Kael's last breath. They were all inside that light now, fragments of defiance sewn into code. She crawled toward the ruptured viewport, the wind clawing at her. The world tilted, mountains and sky swapping places. A scream lodged in her throat, not fear but rage. Rage at the Vintaris clinical godhood. Rage at Earth's frail, gasping beauty. Rage at herself for surviving. The impact tore the scream away. She woke in a tomb of living metal. The mothership's carcass had buried itself in a glacier, its biotech veins threading through the ice like parasitic roots. Elara dragged herself free, her ribs a constellation of pain, and stumbled into the thin, knife-cold air. The countermeasure vial still glowed in her fist. Above, the aurora borealis shimmered through a haze of ash, Xyroth's final command lingering in the stratosphere, the purifiers devouring everything. In the valley below, a cluster of geodesic domes flickered, the last human refuge, powered by cobbled-together fusion cores and desperation. Elara limped toward it, her boots crunching over snow littered with debris, a child's synth-leather mitten, half dissolved.
This story continues. Subscribe to our channel, like the video, and listen to the rest.